We continue now at the top of Daf Peiches Amud Aleph in Mesechet Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 88a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing the Shita, the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says that to be liable as a Zaken Mamre, the Zaken Mamre has to be issuing a ruling that involves Kares. And so the Gemara was going through all of the various possible cases by a Zaken Mamre and showing how each one can involve Kares. And the Gemara says, where can we find an issue that involves Kares when it comes to Tsaras, to Negoyim that have to do with the clothing? And the Gemara says we can find that by the machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Nosson ben Avtulmis, because Rabbi Nosson ben Avtulmis says, from where do we know lepricha bebegadim shitahora, that by clothing, just like by people, if it spreads, that is a sign of purity. Nemra karachas vegabachas be'adam, it uses the word karachas and gabachas by tsaras, by a person. V'nemra karachas vegabachas bebegadim, and it uses the same two words, karachas and gabachas, by clothing. Malahalon, just like over there, parach bekulotar, by a person, if it spreads throughout his entire body, we say he is pure. Afkan, so to here by clothing, parach bekulotar, if it spreads throughout his entire body, he is pure. And so that's a machlokas. The Rabbanan disagree, and that can involve kares. Rashi explains, lepricha bebegadim in parach tifrach hatzaras v'nismale kol habeged, if the tzaras spreads to the entire garment, adam sheparcha bekulotar, by a person, if it spreads in its entirety, he is pure. Dechsiv in parach tifrach hatzaras, says that in the pasuk. Upligi Rabbanan, and the point over here is that the Rabbanan, they disagree with Rabbi Nosson ben Avtulmis. Vehecha de parcha bebeged kulo. Now let's say that this happened, that it spread throughout an entire garment, v'ichnisa lemikdash, and he brings it into the mikdash. O hanogei bo nichnas lemikdash, or somebody who touches that garment enters the mikdash. So l'Rabbanan chayev, according to Rabbi Nosson, the person is going to be liable to kares. So l'Rabbi Yonasan, there were different texts, whether it was Rabbi Yonasan or Rabbi Nosson. Or Rabbi Yonasan pater, and according to Rabbi Yonasan, we will say exempt. And the Gemara continues, the Brisa said earlier that the Pasuk says divrei, it uses the word divrei, and the Brisa said elu ha'erchin v'hacharamim v'hekdeshos, that refers to erchin, valuations, and charamim, dedications, and hekdeshos, things that are made hekdesh. And again, over there, where are we going to find the issues that are relevant to kares? Again, the full Pasuk was ki polei mimcha davar la mishpat, ben dam ledam, ben din ledinu, vein nega lo nega, divrei rivos b'sharecha, uses the word divrei. And so again, where are we going to find an issue of kares relevant to erchin, charamim, and hekdesh? And the Gemara explains, ha'erchin, when it comes to arachin, beplugsa the Rabbi Meir for Rabbanan, there's a machlokas, for example, between Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan. The Tanan, because we learned in the Mishnah, hamarich pachos mi ben chodesh, if a person gives a valuation on a person that is less than a month old, Rabbi Meir omer nos in damav, Rabbi Meir says there is no erech for somebody less than a month old, so you give the value, the person would be sold, that baby would be sold as a slave. V'chachamim omer, the chachamim say, lo amar klum, he has said nothing, and it's not considered, he doesn't know anything. And Rashi explains, Hamarich pachos mi ben chodesh, Amar al pachos mi ben chodesh, erko olai. A person says about a baby that's less than a month old, I'm going to give his erech, that's what I'm going to donate to the mikdash, v'atorah, lo nosno lo erech. Now the Torah says there is no erech for such a young child, the gabe erchen ksiv mi ben chodesh, because by erchen it says it has to be a month or older. So there's a machlokes what we do in that case. Rabbi Meir omer no sein damav, Rabbi Meir says you give his value, kamashu nimkar b'shuk, how much would this baby be sold at, what price in the marketplace, to kosav, because Rabbi Meir holds ein adam motzi devar v'levatol, a person doesn't say something for nothing. V'yodea she'ein erech lepachos mi ben chodesh, a person knows there's no fixed valuation for a child less than a month old. V'gamar v'yomer l'shem damim, so it must be that he's saying it in terms of the value on the marketplace as a slave. U'l'Rabbanan pater, and according to Rabbanan, the person is pater here, he has said nothing. And so v'imba gizbor mashchana, so now how is it relevant to kares? Let's say the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash will come and say you owe this money. Rabbi Meir have a hekdesh, so if he takes property from him to pay this erech, according to Rabbi Meir, that's hekdesh, and therefore ve'ini shemiskadeshes bo, you wouldn't be able to use that item. A woman would not be miskadeshes bo, it wouldn't be a good kiddushin. Ela imkein yodea bo, unless he's aware of that. Kidetznanu vehekdesh b'mezid kiddush b'shogeg lo kiddush. By hekdesh, if it's done on purpose, we say that's a good kiddushin, but b'shogeg is not a good kiddushin. So you have a situation where it wouldn't be a good kiddushin. Well, the Rabbanan lo have a hekdesh, and according to the Rabbanan, it's not hekdesh. V'areu shel bailim, and therefore it belongs to the owners, l'kadesh bo ish, and therefore it would be a good kiddushin. Let's say somebody else would use it for kiddushin, that wouldn't be a good kiddushin because it belongs to the bailim. Inami l'Rebbi Meir have a hekdesh v'anen mimenu. Another way we can explain, and again, if we're talking about kiddushin, that's obviously relevant to kares because now we have a case of eishes ish. Rashi offers another explanation. Inami l'Rebbi Meir have a hekdesh v'anen mimenu. You could say as follows: it's considered hekdesh according to Rabbi Meir, and if someone benefits from it, gets personal benefit, maybe asham me'ilos, he has to bring an asham me'ilah. Yeshua. V'areoso asham kodesh kadashim, and that asham is going to be kodesh kadashim. V'ochlo betumas gufa chayiv kares, and if someone eats that carbon betumas gufa when he is tamei, he's going to be chayiv kares. Well, the rabbanon lo have a hekdesh. According to the rabbanon, it won't be hekdesh. V'areishal bailam hu, it's going to be of the owners. V'hanenem imenu lo mas, it won't be meila if you get benefit, personal benefit. V'mhevi asham meilos chulin lazaru, if he does bring a carbon asham meilos, that's not even going to be a carbon. It's like bringing chulin lazara. Vein chayav and all of mishum tumah, and he's not liable in term because of tumah over there. And so that can be another way where you can get to kares in such a situation. And the Gemara continues, Hacharamim, what about dedications? How can that come to a situation of kares? Beplugsa, for example, by the argument to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira of Rabbanan. There's an argument between Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira and the Rabbanan. Tetanan, because we learned in a Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, Stam charamim lebedek habayis. When somebody makes something chayrim, he dedicates it, it's for bedek habayis, it's for the repair of the Beis HaMikdash. Shenemar, as it says in the Pasuk, Al chayrim kodesh kadashim hu Hashem, is learned from the Pasuk that it's lebedek habayis. The Chachamim say, Stam charamim lekohen, that in general dedications they go to the Kohen. Shenemar, as it says in the Pasuk, Kistei acherim lakohen tiyachuz also. It mentions the Kohen in this Pasuk. Imkein matal v'lomer kodesh kadashim hu Hashem, and if that's the case, why does the Pasuk say kodesh kadashim hu Hashem? Shechol al kodshei kodshim. The point is that it can be chal on kodshei kodshim v'al kodshim kalim, and it can also be chal on both kodshei kodshim and on kodshei kodshim kalim as well. And in any case, here you have a machlokus in terms of what exactly happens to the chayrim. Does it go to bedek habayis or not? And Rashi explains lebedek habayis umoalin behem. So again, if it's going to go to bedek habayis, that's something that can have meila la kohanim ve'ein moalin behem. But if it goes to the kohanim, there is no meila. And Rashi continues, the Chachamim said shechol al kodshei kodshim, that it can be chal on both kodshei kodshim and kodshim kalim, meaning kiditanan, like we learned in the Mishnah, machrim adam es kadashav. A person can dedicate his hekdesh im neder, for example. Let's say as a neder, no sein demem, he gives that value. Vim nedavan, if it's in a davan, no sein as tovasim kafi chelik sheyesh lo ba. He gives according to the value, the amount of control that he has over that nedava. Kidim mefarish b'Meseches Erchin b'Perek HaMakdash. That's all explained in Meseches Erchin. And so again, in any case, you have this machlokus over here of what happens by charamim, and it's going to be relevant to meila, which is therefore relevant to kares, as we said above. And the Gemara continues, Hekdeshos, when it comes to Hekdesh, how can that be relevant to Kares? The Gemara says, for example, Bepluksa Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Rabbanan. The machlok between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the Rabbanan, the Tanya, because we learned in a Brisa. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Afilu tzinora shel Hekdesh, even a small fork that's Hekdesh, Tzricha asara b'nei adam leftosa, you need 10 people in order to redeem it from Hekdesh. And Rashi explains, Tzinora mazleg katan and shatavin bozav. Again, that's a small fork, it's used to spin the gold. Yud kohanim, so you need to have 10 kohanim. Kidim mefarish parakama yud kohanim ksuvin beparsha. It says kohanim 10 times in the parsha. Im nifteis bepachos me'asar ben adam. So then, let's say it's redeemed with less than 10 people. Adayin hekdeshi, it's still hekdesh. Umoalin ban, there would be meila, which again can be relevant to kares. U'l'rabbanan ein moalin ban. According to the Rabbanan, there is no meila in such a case. And the Gemara continues. The Brisa said earlier rivos. It says in the pasuk the word rivos that includes zehashka sota, that includes giving to drink to the sota, va'arifas o eglin, the breaking of the neck by the eglo arufa, vitaras mitzora, and the purification of the mitzora. And so where are all of these cases relevant to kares? The Gemara says hashkoah sota, when it comes to giving to drink to the sota, bepluksa de Rabbi Eliezer of Rabbi Yoshua. For example, that would be the machlokus between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua the Tanan, because we learned in a Mishnah hamakane liishto, when a person warns his wife not to go into seclusion with another man. Rabbi Eliezer Omar makane al pishnaim. Rabbi Eliezer says he warns through 2 witnesses, umashka al pi echad, and then he gives her to drink through 1 witness, or al pi atzmo, or himself. Rabbi Yoshua Omar, Rabbi Yoshua says makane al pishnaim, he warns with 2 witnesses, umashka al pishnaim, he gives her to drink through 2 witnesses. And Rashi explains, Hamakane leishto hamasr beishto al tistri mishploni. He's warning his wife, don't go into seclusion with so-and-so. Umashka al pi echad, and so then he gives to drink through 1 witness according to Rabbi Eliezer. Shebov yamar ani risia shenistra, meaning that 1 witness comes and says, I saw that she did go into seclusion. Vim lo hishkan eseres olav, and if she's not going to drink there, so then she becomes prohibited to him. Utanan, and we learned in the Mishnah, Elu lo shosos velo notlos ksubas. In the following cases, they don't drink and they don't get ksuba. Homeres V'amas eini shosa. For example, let's say she's supposed to drink, and she says, I'm not going to drink, so then she's not going to get her ksuba. And so therefore, the machlokas is between the Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer is as follows. Let's say you have a situation where you don't have edei stira. Again, Rabbi Yehoshua says you have to give her to drink al pi shnayim through two witnesses. Let's say you don't have two witnesses. V'yamra eini shos, and she says, I'm not going to drink in such a situation where there are no witnesses. So there, Rabbi Eliezer ein laksuba. According to Rabbi Eliezer, she has to drink because she's supposed to drink even al pi eid echad or even al pi atzmo. And if she's saying she's not going to drink, she loses her ksuba. And Rabbi Yehoshua yesh la ksuba. According to Rabbi Yehoshua, she still gets her ksuba because she doesn't have to drink. There's no two witnesses over here. She'eina neseres alav. She's not prohibited to him. V'machra la'acher ksuba sakanen. So therefore, she's going to sell to somebody else her ksuba. So it's going to be a good kinyan. V'im tofes memono shel zeh kedei ksuba. And if the person's going to seize that person's money according to the ksuba, hareu shelo, that's his lekadesh bo esa'isha, in order to be mekadesh a woman. Will Rabbi Eliezer have a gezel v'lo kiddush? According to Rabbi Eliezer, however, that's going to be stealing, and it's not going to be a kedushin. So again, you have a nafkamina here in terms of the ksuba, and that nafkamina in terms of the ksuba can lead to a machlokas in terms of whether something is a kedushin or not. And of course, again, by kedushin, when it comes to eishes ish, that can be relevant to kares. And the Gemara continues, Arifa segla, when it comes to the breaking of the neck by the egufa. So where can we have a relevance to kares over there? But pluksad Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, that could be, for example, by the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, the Tanan, because we learned in the Mishnah, Me'ayin hayu moded, in the process of egla arufa is done when a body is found. You have to measure which city it's closest to. So from where on the body do we measure? Rabbi Eliezer says mitiburo, we measure from the stomach. Rabbi Akiva Omer mechotmo. Rabbi Akiva says we measure from the nose. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says mimokom shenasa cholol. We do it from the area where he became a cholol, from the area where he was killed. Mitzavaro, meaning to say from his neck. So you have a machlokas over here, exactly where we measure. And Rashi explains me'ayin hayu moded in leida, because we have to know ezu ir krov el hacholol, what city is closest to this dead body. So mitiburo, so the first opinion again from the stomach, va'osa shakrova letiburo, the city that's closest to the stomach, tavi eso egla, is going to bring the egla arufa, velo hakrova lechotmo, not the one that's closest to his nose. And Rashi continues, Rabbi Akiva Omer mechotmo, Rabbi Akiva says from his nose, of Mesechet mefarish taima. In Mesechet we explain the reason behind the machlokas. Mar savar ikar chiyusei biape. One says the main source of life for a person is his nose. Umar savar ikar chiyusei b'tibure, and one says the stomach. And then the last opinion was mimokav shenasa chol, from the place where he became a dead body. Tahainu mitzavari, meaning from the neck. The stam chol min atzavar, because in general we assume you have a dead body, it's from the neck. Kidim mefarish hasam lasisos chal tzavari chol rishoyim, like it explains over there from the pasuk in Yecheskel. Utnan, and we learned in the Mishnah, hamakadesh be'egla arufa ena mekudeshes. If one is mekadesh with egla arufa, it's not a kedushin. V'modad zaken mamre mitiburo. So, for example, let's say the zaken mamre, he measures from the stomach, ubezin mechozmo, and the court measures from his nose. Ve'viu elu egla ve'elu egla. And so this city brings an egla arufa, and that city brings an egla arufa. Lemar zu egla asura ve'ein mekachin bo. According to this one, this is egla is aser, and it's not a kedushin. V'zu eino egla, and the other one is not an egla ruf mekachin, but it is a kedushin. Ulamar havivchan. According to the other, it's reversed. And again, anything that's relevant to kedushin can be relevant to kares. And the Gemara continues, Ta'aras Mitzora, when it comes to the purification of Mitzora, how can that be relevant to Kares? And the Gemara says, for example, but Pluksad Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan, the machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan. The Tanan, because we learned in a Mishnah, Ein lo bo en yad, bo en regel, ozan yimonis. Let's say he doesn't have a thumb or a big toe, or he doesn't have a right ear. Ein lo taharo lamis. Those are part of the purification process. This Mitzora is never going to be able to be purified. Rabbi Eliezer says, no sin lo al makom of yotze. You could just put it on the area where the thumb would have been, and that will fulfill the obligation. Rabbi Shimon says no sin al shel smol viyotze. You can put it on the left. Let's say there's no right ear, so you put it on the left ear, and that can fulfill the obligation. And Rashi explains, Ein lo taharo lamis, there's no purification at all. To bu'inan krakir chsiv, you need to fulfill the pasuk as written, kedamron ben nigmar hadin, like we say in Perek Nigmar Hadin. No sin al makoma, you put it on the location. Al mokum haboin, on the area where the thumb is. No sin dam ha'asham, that's where you put the blood of the carbon asham. Vitar likanis lemikdash, then he's pure, he can enter the mikdash. V'lechol kodesh, and to eat kodesh, tahainu zedona kares. So therefore, that's something that's relevant. If it's done on purpose, that can be relevant to a punishment of kares. And the Gemara continues, the Brisa said earlier that when the Pasuk says, Bisharecha in your gates, Zeleket Shecho Peya, that refers to Leket Shecha and Peya. Where can we find Machloksin by Leket Shecha and Peya that are relevant to Kares? So Leket, when it comes to Leket, it's Nan, because we learned in the Mishnah, Shnei Shibol and Leket, 2 stalks are Leket. If it's Leket, it goes to the poor. Shlosha Einon Leket. If it's 3, it's not Leket. Shichacha, when it comes to forgotten sheaves. Shnei Omrin Shichacha. If you have 2 bundles, that's Shicha. Shlosha Einon Shicha. 3 is not Shicha. Again, Shicha goes to the poor. V'alkulan, and on all of these, Beis Shammai Omrim Shalosh Lani. Beis Shammai say that 3 go to the poor. V'arba L'Bal Habayis. And if it's 4, then it remains to the Bal Habayis. And so that would be a question whether it goes to the Ani or not. And Rashi explains, Shalosh Einon Leket She'ein Derech Lafkir, and if it's already 3, that's a larger number. It's not something that, it's not an amount that someone makes hefker. Shlosha Einon Shichacha, if it's 3, it's not Shichacha. B'Sifra Yalef Lam Yikrai, Parsha Shichacha. In the Sifra, they learn out from Psukim by the Parsha of Shichacha. And the point is, Vim Nechlak Zakin Mamre, if a Zakin Mamre would argue in such a case, V'yamar Av Shlosha Shichacha, and say that 3 is Shichacha, Uba'ani V'notlan, and then a poor person takes it, Uva Balabayis V'notlan Heimenu, and a Balabayis takes it from him, L'Zakin Mamre have a gezel, according to the Zakin Mamre, that is going to be stealing. Vein Mekachin Bo Isha, and therefore it would not be a Kiddushin. Well, the Rabbanan Mikudeshes, and according to the Rabbanan, if you use that for Kiddushin, it would be a Kiddushin. And again, anything that's relevant to Kiddushin is possibly relevant to Kares. And the Gemara continues, Peya, what about when it comes to Peya, which is what is left from the corners of the field? But Pluksa the Rabbi Yishmael v'Rabbanan, there, for example, the machlokus between Rabbi Yishmael and the Rabbanan. The Tanan, because we learned in the Mishnah, mitzvahs Peya, the mitzvah of Peya is lahafresh min hakama. It should be separated from the stalks, lohifresh min hakama. If it's not separated from the stalks, yafresh min ha'omrin, then it should be separated from the bundles. Lohifresh min ha'omrin, if it's not separated from the bundles, yafresh min hakri, so it should be separated from the pile. Ad shalom mercho, that's before it's smoothed out. But mercha, once it's smoothed out, ma'aser v'nosein lo. So then you take off meiser and then you give it to him. Mishum Rabbi Yishmael amru, and in the name of Rabbi Yishmael they say af mafresh and min ha'isa, he can even separate it from the dough. And Rashi explains, mitzvahs peya mafresh min hakama, tichsiv lo sechale lahanach lefneim, you're supposed to leave the stalks to them, v'heim yiksuru, and then the poor, they're going to cut it, and merchu bekri, if it's already been smoothed over in the pile, at that point, nischai b'maiser, then there's an obligation to giving maiser, the nigmer malachto, because the work is done, hilkach, therefore, in that situation, ma'aser tchila sakri, first you give maiser, mikol masros of inosin lo asapeya, then he gives peya, shilu hefrisha lo hayu aniyim tzrichin la'asra, to leket shechu peya, because had he separated, the poor people don't need to take off meiser, because leket shech and pay in general are potter from meiser. And then the other opinion is af mafresh min ha'isa, even from dough, im tachna v'losha, let's say it was already ground and it was already kneaded, you even separate in that situation. Well, the Tanakama tachna potter. Now, according to Tanakama, once it's been ground, it's exempt. The kanya b'shinoi, there's already a kinyan through that transformation. So therefore, let's say a poor person would take peya after it's been ground, Rabbi Yishmael lo have a gezel. According to Rabbi Yishmael, it's not stealing, that's still peya. And the Rabbanan have a gezel, and according to the Rabbanan, it is stealing. And so again, whenever you have something that's relevant to gezel, that can be relevant to kiddushin, which can be relevant to kares. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Gimel Batei Dinim, there were 3 courts in Yerushalayim. The Zakin Mamre would go to each court. If the first court knew the ruling, they would tell the ruling. If not, it would go to the next court, etc., until it came before the Sanhedrin. And the Gemara says, Omer Rav Kahana says, Who Omer mi Pi Shmuel? Let's say the Zakin Mamre says that he's issuing his ruling based on a tradition that he heard. V'hein Omer mi Pi Shmuel. And they say the same thing. They say based on a tradition. So then Eino Nerag. Rav Kahana says in such a case, he's not killed. Hu Omer Kachu Bein. If he says, this is what it seems to me, meaning this is my opinion, it's not a tradition. V'hein Omer, and they say Kachu Beinenu. The court says this is what seems to be in our eyes, not a tradition. Again, Eino Nerag, he's not killed in that case either. V'kol shekein hu Omer min Pi Shmuel, and certainly if he says it's a tradition, V'hein Omer Kachu Beinenu, and they say this just seems to us to be correct, then for sure Eino Nerag, he's not going to be killed because he's coming from a tradition. Ad sheyomer, it has to specifically be when he says Kachu Beinai, that this is what seems to be correct in my eyes, this is my opinion. V'hein Omer mi Pi Shmuel, and they say that it's a tradition, that's a situation where he's arguing with the court and he can be killed. Teda, you should know, Sharei lo hargu es Akavya ben Mahalalel. They didn't kill Akavya ben Mahalalel for exactly this reason, because it didn't fulfill the conditions that it has to be that he said Kachu Beinai, and they're saying mi Pi Shmuel. Rabbi Lazar Omer, Rabbi Lazar says, Afilu hu Omer mi Pi Shmuel, even if he says it's a tradition, V'hein Omer Kachu Beinenu, and they say say this is just what it seems to be in our eyes, this is our opinion, even in that situation, Nerag, he is killed, even though in that situation he's coming to them with a tradition and they're coming with just an opinion, still he's going to be killed according to Rebbe Lozer. And what's the reason for that? Kadesh lo yirbu machlukos b'Yisrael, so there shouldn't be so many arguments in Klal Yisrael. Now, if that's the case, if Rebbe Lozer goes so far, so if you're going to say, Akavya ben Mahalalel, why didn't they kill Akavya ben Mahalalel? The Gemara says to that, the reason why they didn't kill Akavya ben Mahalalel is because he didn't issue a halacha that led it to actually doing an action based on the halacha that he was teaching. It wasn't a ruling that ended up being acted out in practicality. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Kach dorashti v'kach dorshu chavera. He says, I darshan like this, and my colleagues, they said like that. Kach lamadati v'kach lamdu chavera. This is what I taught, and this is what my colleagues taught. So what is that language in the Mishnah? My lav is it not? Hu omer mipi hashmua, that he's saying it's a tradition. V'heim omer, and they're saying kachu beinenu. They're saying that this is what seems right in our eyes. It seems to be even in such a situation, you can have zaken mamre. And the Gemara says, lo, no, not necessarily. Hu omer kach. It could be hu omer kachu bein. He's saying this is what it seems in my eyes. V'heim omer mipi hashmua, and they're saying from a tradition, it's not necessarily true that it's specifically, that it's even in a situation where he says mipi hashmua, and they say kachu beinenu. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come and hear the following proof. The Yomer Rabbi Yoshia, because Rabbi Yoshia says, Shlosha Devarim Sochli Ze'ira Me'ansha Yerushalayim. There were three things that Ze'ira told me from the men of Yerushalayim. The first is, Baal Shemachal al Kinuyev. Let's say a husband forgives the warning that he gave to his wife, Kinuyev Machal, then the warning is forgiven. And Rashi explains, Al Kinuyev Shekine Le'ishto. He warned his wife, Al Tistri Imploni, that you shouldn't go into seclusion with so-and-so. So Kinuyev Machal, so it is forgiven. Vim Nistra, and if she does go into seclusion, Eina Neseres Olav, she does not become prohibited to him. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Peiches Amid Beis.